Hare Krishna, and thank you for joining a new live event of the GBC Strategic Planning team. Today we are honored, privileged, and very happy to have with us Praghosa Prabhu. He's a GBC, a governing body commission member, and is responsible to supervise the activities of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness in many important countries in Europe, such as the United Kingdom, Ireland, Iceland, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Switzerland. I may forget a few, but you get the idea, all the North European countries. He is also a member of the GBC. Yes?
I was just going to say all the cold countries.
And then he's also member of the GBC Organizational Development Committee, member of the Committee of the Relation between GBC and BBT, member of the GBC Nominations Committee, screening the new and future GBCs. He's also a chief editor of the dandavats.com famous website. So we are very happy to have you here, Praghosa Prabhu. Thank you for accepting our invitation. And maybe we could start with a general question. How this present pandemic has affected your service as a GBC?
Well, Kantebu, may I first say that the honor is all mine to be talking live on the SPT channel to whichever devotees are tuning in. So that honor is all mine. And may I also say that I hope everybody, I think you're in Mayapur, so I hope Mayapur is safe and sound after Storm Amphan or Cyclone Amphan. So I hope it's all. We actually had a storm here. I as you know, I'm locked down in Dublin, Ireland, and we had a storm here overnight. So I was thinking of the Mayapur devotees. It was a storm from our perspective, but just a little wind, I guess, from Cyclone Amphan's point of view. But we're all well too. And then the other thing I should mention, just on a personal basis to people listening, I think to mention in relation to yourself, this is probably the first interview you've done, or at least it's the closest interview you've done to where one of your family members is currently locked down as well, I guess, which is Calester in Dublin, which is literally less than 1 kilometer from where from where I'm speaking now.
Okay.
Just to inform
that's my sister. She lives in Dublin now since decades, and she loves Ireland and the Irish flavor and mood. Yes, thank you for giving her shelter.
She's married to an Irishman. I won't comment on that. Okay, so in relation to my own service, one of the biggest things in relation to that is the travel. Travel has stopped, and that's a big part. Actually, you've just listed different countries that I have some service for or service in, and so that's stopped. So I'd say that's probably the biggest impact directly on me in terms of my service. So then you have to work out other options to compensate for your inability to travel to all the various yatras and countries and temples like that. And so far so good. Obviously it means an awful lot of stuff online. That's the main thing. But so far so good. Things seem to be, it's kind of an interesting thing. You often hear some people, they're quite stressed about the situation of the pandemic in general. But, aside from devotees obviously having Krishna consciousness to rely on to help with that stress and anxiety, everybody's in the same boat. And because everybody's in the same boat, there's an element of, we're all in this together. So likewise with my service, everybody's in this together, not just the other GBC members, but all devotees. So they can't travel either. So somehow or another, and so far so good, we are only, I think here in Ireland or UK, we're 9 weeks now, I think, into this lockdown. But yeah, we've been compensating, and so far so good.
Thank you. Good to hear that, Prabhu. Now, what are the main challenges that the temples and communities you supervise they may be facing due to the crisis and the lockdown?
Yeah. Now, that's significant actually. The difficulties and it actually does vary from temple to temple, center to center, depending on their unique circumstances in terms of their different activities and all of that they do. But one of the in the UK, some listeners may be aware that we had some direct interaction with this coronavirus. I think you interviewed my dear friend Vishwambar Prabhu in the not too distant past. So you will have got a flavor, and the listeners will have got a flavor as it related to that, because he came down with the virus and suffered very significantly from it. Great now that he's well on the road to recovery, but he suffered from it. So we did have that experience where quite a lot of our devotees did actually come down with this virus. They weren't all confirmed in terms of testing, but quite a few were, and the sense is that quite a few others had it. So that certainly was an impact. The other thing was a very deep diving deep into the deep end in terms of contributions to our temples, because when the temples aren't open, the hundi boxes can't be accessed, and other donations that may come in just through personal interaction with devotees. So that was quite a big impact. Some of our temples also, particularly those temples that would depend on congregational members helping with them, initiated congregational members, of course, helping them with deity worship. So some of our temples did have to lower the standard of deity worship a little bit. We were just having a call about that yesterday, and gradually now that's starting to improve for different reasons. But that was definitely an impact. Another one, very big one in my areas, because we have quite a few restaurants. Off the top of my head, you're talking about 6, maybe 7 restaurants, maybe more actually. But they all have to close. All of them just had to close instantly overnight. Yet all of the expenses that still have to be paid in relation to those restaurants still are ongoing. So that was definitely a very big hit. And of course, the other big hit was book distribution. Effectively just shut down again overnight, because you can go out on the street, but you've got 2 problems. One is there's nobody on the street when you go out practically. And the second problem is, if there are some people out in the street, you can't approach them because you have to keep 2 meters from them. So that makes book distribution virtually impossible, at least in the traditional format that a lot of our temples would rely on. Yeah, so they'd be some of the and then no festivals. We have a really active festival team in the UK, which the festival team was inaugurated by a wonderful devotee that I'm sure some of the listeners would remember. That's His Grace Tribhuvannath Prabhu, who I knew very, very well. So big festival program, many dozens and dozens of festivals every year. They've all had to be cancelled for the foreseeable future. And the biggest one of all every year that they run, as I say, in the UK, is called Glastonbury. I don't know if you ever heard of Glastonbury, but it's a music festival where they go and they have a special place there, etc. And they distribute huge amounts of prasadam. Last year, I think they distributed 15,000 plates of prasadam just in the weekend, the 2-day weekend at the Glastonbury Festival. So that's not happening. So festivals closing. And then the other thing, big thing as well, no Ratha Yatra. Actually, I heard yesterday that the Puri Ratha Yatra is also cancelled this year. So it just shows how widespread this pandemic is affecting different activities, and not particularly, but also our ISKCON activities.
Thank you. A lot of challenges. Now, any positive development? Any observations or some gestures of extraordinary generosity, or some new developments that you like to share that you have observed over this period?
Well, let me compliment your interviewing skills. Very good to ask the challenges first and the positives second. That's very good. Yeah, certainly there's been some positives, absolutely, and I could think of a few of them. I mean, one would be the increase in online activity to compensate for many of the things that I've just listed that we can't do. So a lot of online preaching and outreach activities going on to help with that. Also, at Bhaktivedanta Manor, which is the biggest temple in my area and arguably the biggest temple in Europe, arguably the biggest temple outside of India, they so far have made up to 3,000 phone calls to people that they would have on their contact list just to keep in touch and have that personal touch with them, so as that, you know, people don't feel abandoned like that. So that's been a real big thing. We've also distributed over 1,000 mantra meditation packs that have chanting beads in them, a little explanation of the mantra, and different things like that. So over 1,000 of those mantra meditation packs have been distributed since the lockdown. Also, you know, the temples that have a brahmachari ashram or brahmacharini ashram like that, where you have resident devotees, one real positive thing that's come back from them is that they're experiencing a much more of two things: a family atmosphere, because, you know, they're all interacting with each other and they're not distracted by so many other people visiting and all of that kind of thing. So a nice family atmosphere. But as well as the family atmosphere, they're reporting that our temples have become like monasteries. Now, of course, that's a wonderful thing in the sense, particularly for our renunciants, that the temple feels like a monastery where you're really focusing on your sadhana and your personal development and reflecting on all the big questions of life, etc. Of course, we're also an outreach movement, so, you know, we understand as soon as our temples can open, that they will be used primarily for outreach again. But it was just an interesting observation that devotees are feeling the temples, the resident devotees, feeling them more to be like monasteries now. Another thing is that devotees are telling me that they feel more regulated at the moment, and that again connects to the same point, because an awful lot, and I guess we have devotees listening in India, and you know, I know this is the case in India also. A lot of our preaching programs, our outreach programs, they take place in the evening, and oftentimes that can result in devotees getting back late, and then it's difficult to be getting up for the morning program and all of that kind of thing. So devotees are reporting to me that they feel that they're becoming much more regulated as a result of this lockdown. The other thing is that, and I'm sure this is the same in other parts of the world, but here in the UK and other parts of Europe, that there's a lot of prasadam distribution taking place. I should give a mention to another dear friend of mine who I took initiation with, actually, Praghosa Prabhu, who he's really been upping the prasadam distribution, as have different temples. Our Welsh temple is really up their prasadam distribution, and I think we're looking at something in the region of I think 2,000 plates a day combined, or through all the my whole area, about 2,000 plates a day. A lot of those are being given to what we call the NHS workers, or the National Health Service workers, the nurses and doctors and all of that. So that's really helping also. That's been greatly appreciated by them. And there was an interview with one NHS worker on Channel 4 News, which is a national broadcaster, and they specifically mentioned and expressed appreciation for the Hare Krishna devotees for feeding them during this difficult time. So yeah, in that sense, there are a lot of positive things going on. I should also mention, in relation to yourself, Kanteya Prabhu, because it was mentioned to me and I had to have a little bit of a chuckle, because for those listeners who aren't aware, Kanteya Prabhu is chairing a committee, which he didn't mention actually, which I also work with him on, called the Constitution Committee, to come up with a constitution for ISKCON. And a couple of my temples told me that they've now, during this lockdown, found more time to work on their own constitution, and have a great help, you know. So that's good news.
Yeah, we should follow their footsteps. Okay, now I want to ask you something a bit perhaps subtle. We have seen that the pandemic has stimulated a lot of flourishing of conspiracy theories. I mean, we have seen that in the UK, some people, hopefully not devotees, but some people have destroyed 5G's equipments, thinking that there was a link between the virus and this 5G towers. Also, among devotees in Facebook and other social media platforms, we see that a lot of devotees talk about this pandemic through a number of angles, even very, we could say, particular. I mean, we don't want to sound judgmental. Some of these theories might be true. We don't know, but there are so many that obviously they cannot be all true. So, is that your experience also in your area? And what's your angle on this, we could say, social aspect of the pandemic?
Thanks, Conte. That's a very good question, by the way. It's a very good question. Just before I go to answer it, there's just one thing that I forgot to mention in relation to positives. Since the lockdown and in a period of 10 days, the Nrsimha campaign in the UK for raising funds for the TOVP, and you're situated in Mayapur, so the TOVP is obviously going at a great pace there. It was fantastic to see it when I was there in February. But the UK raised 25,000 sterling, actually. Our main person in the UK raising funds is a lady called Sukanti Radha, and she's done a fantastic job for many years, actually. But just during this lockdown alone, over 25,000 sterling has been raised. So I just wanted to just mention that. Okay, going to your question about conspiracy theories, etc. Maybe I could, given that I don't want to overdo this, but given that I'm sitting here in Ireland, I could quote some Irish to you, some Gaelic, and it's Do irt ban lum, gudu irt ban lie. And that means, in English, it means a woman told me, or a person told me that a person told them. And conspiracy theories, what to do in one sense about them. I read something on the BBC website recently where it was saying that people are really getting into these conspiracy theories, and family members are really concerned about it because people are becoming totally consumed by them, and also even more stressed out as a result of them because of all the negatives that are connected to them, and all these negative motives that people have and governments have and all that kind of thing related to them. So they're actually very unhealthy for people if they take them as gospel and believe everything that they read. Another comment on that 5G thing is that this pandemic is spreading in more countries, and arguably more widespread in more countries that don't have 5G than do have 5G. So, what to do with conspiracy theories? All I know is, personally, I'm an asthma sufferer, had it since I was a little boy. And I referred to Praghosa Prabhu, who's living testimony to the severity of this virus, if you're unfortunate enough to receive it. He, of course, is originally from Italy, like yourself. You're Italian yourself. And Bergamo, where our main temple, or one of our main temples, I think in Italy, Villaggio Hare Krishna, is located, was the part that was affected most seriously by this pandemic. And people, that the intensive care units were overflowing with people. So many people were dying. They didn't have enough facility for dealing with the corpses, etc., etc. So certainly this is real. Then you go back to the point you raised about, well, where did it come from, and the conspiracy theories that are connected to it. I would say one quick thing on that conspiracy theories, by very definition, they don't really rely, or they're not fact checked, to use that phrase. The facts are never checked. Really, they're just coming from the fertile imagination of people's minds. And of course, we know philosophically how fertile the mind can be. And that lovely verse from Bhagavad Gita, Udared Atmanatmanam Natmanamu Vishadayet, that if we're in control of our mind is our greatest friend. But if we're not in control of the mind is our greatest enemy. And I would suggest that the people putting out these conspiracy theories may not have complete control of their minds. So all these things come out as a result of that. On the other hand, like I say, governments, and I wouldn't suggest for a moment that there aren't motivations related to governments, and people within governments, individuals don't have motivations. But at the same time, the way that the society has developed over the last 100 years or more, so many more checks and balances are put in place as it relates to governments. And they have to follow rules, they have to follow laws like that. So for them to get away with some massive conspiracy theory that they've, fostered on the world is actually, to my mind, really a stretch beyond realism. Whereas on the other side, as I've just mentioned, people just spouting out conspiracy theories, they don't have to follow any rules, they don't have to follow any structures, they just put it out there. So yeah, I think we should just be, and I don't want to sound condescending, but I think we should just be basically sensible about these kind of things, and try to take things in a balanced way, and by the way, the heading the list of possible reasons where this pandemic originated from, and that is this wet market, warm market, wet market, whatever they are, in Wuhan in China. It's very interesting that so many of the recent pandemics that have happened to us, SARS and MERS and mad cow disease and all these different things, when they're traced back, it's found that they relate to the slaughter and the consumption of meat and animals like that. If you take mad cow disease, very, very interesting. Cows, as we know, are vegetarian. All they want to do is go into the field and eat grass and chew the cud. That's all they want to do. But the mad cow disease that they got, which was such a horrific disease, came from food that the farmers were buying and feeding them, some grain or whatever. But mixed in with that grain was powdered down bone meal coming from other cows and other animals. And when the cows consumed that, because they're vegetarian by nature, they developed this disease. So for me, as well as that being the most likely source of this pandemic, it's also really, really good for us presenting the message of Krishna consciousness. So rather than us getting sidetracked by so-called conspiracy theories and 5G and whatever else is out there, surely we should actually take what the most likely source is and use it in a positive way for presenting the message of Krishna consciousness and convincing people that a plant-based diet is the diet that we should be pursuing rather than a meat-based diet.
You might have noticed a couple of days ago, the Chinese government banned, I believe, for 5 years, all the wet markets in the country.
I didn't know that. Fantastic. Just see, that can only be a good thing.
Now, talking about more inspirational eating, you and your wife run a number of Govinda restaurants. I mean, last time I was in Dublin, there were 3. I don't know how many you have now. 3?
No, 2.
2.
One we had to close. Just to let you know, one we had to close down due to the last crisis we had, the financial crisis in 2008, because we had just opened the third one. And it hadn't got established, and then the financial crash came, and that really put pressure on it. So 2, yeah.
You already mentioned that all the restaurants have been closed. So, I mean, that certainly affected also that aspect of life, the business of the restaurants. Can you tell us something more? Did you have to fire some employees? Tell us about the Govinda restaurants.
Okay, so yes, it's a big problem. I mean, it's a big problem, the restaurants, for the reasons that we've already talked about, that we can't open them. You can have them open for takeaways, but that's another complication, because historically and traditionally, restaurants in general, and I think it goes also for our Govinda restaurants, most of our Govinda restaurants, we open them in the cities because that's where the people are. Now, ironically enough, as a result of this pandemic, it will be much better having your restaurant in the suburbs because everybody's locked at home and people aren't going into the cities. But how were we able to predict that? It's kind of impossible to predict that. So so they're closed. Big problem. We do takeaways, but at the minute, I think our takeaway sales are running at roughly 10% of what we would normally expect to do if we were able to have people coming in and sitting down and eating. But no, so far we haven't had to fire anybody. I like your choice of words. We probably would, if we did have to do that, we'd probably say let go rather than fired. But anyway, we haven't had to do that at all anywhere here in Dublin, or also any of the restaurants in the UK or elsewhere in Europe. And the main reason for that, and it kind of ties in a little bit with your previous question about the conspiracy theories, the main reason for that is because the governments have come to our aid and they've put in place this thing, what they call a furlough scheme, which basically means that they're paying the staff until the restaurants can open again. Now, that may change if this goes on forever, because I guess governments aren't going to, their pockets aren't so deep that they can do it forever. But so far, they put that in place. And it's kind of interesting that, again, going back to that point about, governments having to follow laws and governments having to follow certain procedures and structures, the government's first duty is to protect the citizens. And I think, many governments, at least my experience of them in Europe, at least, is that they've done a pretty good job at that so far. And as it relates to your specific question, they've stepped in and they have right now, not just that they're paying the wages of the staff of not just, of course, our restaurant, of hundreds, if not thousands of restaurants, that exist. But on top of that, they've put a hold on any mortgage payments that are required. They put a hold on business rates, doesn't have to be paid. VAT, value added tax, doesn't have to be paid during this time. So they've really stepped in to protect businesses, including ours, as much as they possibly can. So right now, no staff have had to be let go. And we're just hoping against hope that the government will keep that support in place until such a time as we can reopen the restaurant.
Okay, that's very good to hear. How many employees all the Govinda restaurant in the UK and Ireland have?
In UK, Ireland, you're talking about, you would be talking
roughly.
I would say altogether you'd be talking, I'd say 50 devotees.
Okay.
Yeah.
So and
most of those devotees tend to be grihastas, so they're dependent on that income and support their families and to look after their own situations. So it would have been very painful to have had to let them go. So as I say, so far we haven't had to do that.
As you can see in the banner, we have who put the link for ISKCONUK.org for any update on the UK Yatra developments. Now, as a leader in ISKCON, if you could have made anything different in handling of the situation now with more than 2 months of observing the situation, what would that be?
Now, are you asking me that in the context of how general society has handled it, or you're asking me in the context of how ISKCON has handled it?
Within ISKCON, I'm asking specifically as a leadership of ISKCON. Would you have done anything differently, knowing how the last 2-3 months went? Any reflection on that?
Not so much.
It's perfectly fine if you say no.
Yeah. I mean, I guess you could say, or I guess I could say, in relation to my own situation, for my own service as GBC, that the governments kind of, they put out official announcements. Prior to the lockdown, at least here in Ireland and the UK, both prime ministers put out, statements and sort of broadcast to the nation. And everybody was actually expecting them to say we're going into lockdown. But it wasn't. It was like a week or a 2 weeks notice that this is coming. This is coming. So I suppose if you, like I said, in relation to some devotees getting the virus in the UK, etc., that I suppose, if I could have been, a little bit more intuitive or whatever, that I might have taken the pre-announcement of the lockdown rather than the lockdown itself as an opportunity to say, hey, to all the temple presidents and all the leaders, etc., maybe we should maybe we should lock down now because this definitely looks like it's coming, and rather than waiting. Now, having said that, the actual pre-presentation or pre-announcement, if you like, of the lockdown came 2 weeks, I think, before the actual lockdown. We did actually lock down or close down temples in the UK about a week, or maybe it was even more than that, 8-9 days before the official lockdown. So we did actually preempt it a little bit.
You did play it very safely.
Yeah, we played safe, yeah. But maybe we could have played even a little bit more safely. Maybe we could have closed down a full 2 weeks before. But it's difficult. Those situations are difficult because particularly, not so much our temples as well, but particularly with restaurants. For us to have took a decision to close down our restaurants 2 weeks before we had to, then who knows? For those 2 weeks, the government wouldn't have stepped in and helped us because they hadn't told us to close restaurants yet. So, it was a difficult thing to judge. Maybe we could have closed down a little earlier, but as I say, difficult to judge that.
Okay. So, any general advice to ISKCON devotees on any level, spiritual, philosophical, financial, social, etc.?
One thing I'd like to say just on this subject, hopefully it will fit in with your question and not be too off the mark. But one thing I would like to say, and this does again go back to the restaurant issue because it affects us as well, but more generally, what seems to be coming across for me is, the first thing that I found very interesting was governments were telling us all we have to wash our hands, keep our hands clean. Then they were telling us we shouldn't bring our shoes inside our houses. We shouldn't shake hands with other people. And I'm sitting there listening to this and thinking, wow, we've been doing that as devotees. We've been doing that ever since we came in contact with the Hare Krishna movement. So that was interesting, that the cultural norms that we've been following for decades and decades based on Srila Prabhupada's mercy, that now governments are advising their citizens to do the same. So I thought that was quite an interesting thing. But then as this thing developed, what also struck me, again and again, for me, these are great kind of preaching opportunities because, basically speaking, the message of Krishna consciousness is an eternal message that doesn't just help you and protect you from crisis like this pandemic, but they're eternal and they relate to every aspect of your life, material life, and of course spiritual life like that. So what I find quite interesting is we understand not a blade of grass moves without the sanction of the Supreme. So that's something that we all accept and know from Bhagavad Gita, etc. So Krishna is in control. So that means that Krishna is also in control of this virus. And one of the impacts of this virus, and governments are really grappling with this and trying to figure it out. But one of the biggest challenges that they face is what they refer to as the hospitality industry. That's what they refer to it. And when you break down the hospitality industry, in essence, that comes down to people taking vacations, people going on holidays. And of course, to go on holidays, for most people to go on holidays, they jump on an airplane. At least here in Europe, they do. So like I said at the beginning, I'm the GBC for all the cold countries in the north of Europe, northwest of Europe. So all people in this part of Europe, they all jump on a plane and they fly to the southern part of Europe, to Spain, Italy, Portugal, or Greece, all those kind of places. So vacations, holidays, that's part of the hospitality industry. Then another big part, and actually just on that point, where a lot of the problem originally started in terms of the spreading of this virus was on cruise ships. So again, cruise ships are a big part of the hospitality industry. Other parts of the two other key parts of the hospitality industry are restaurants, as we've just been talking about, and pubs. Now, I don't know if pubs is a generic term that everyone understands, but basically they're places where people go to drink alcohol, and they're very, very popular in most parts of the world, I guess, but certainly in Europe. In fact, I read on the BBC website also that some MP was demanding of the Prime Minister, demanding that he immediately allows pubs to open, because pubs are part of the British DNA. You cannot not have pubs. It's impossible. Then the whole British culture changes. So public houses where you drink alcohol, restaurants where you eat food, and generally, obviously, our restaurants are serving meat, and holidays, cruise ships, flying, etc. So really, we could translate the word hospitality industry to sense gratification industry, because that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about the sense gratification industry. So it's interesting. Krishna is in control of this virus, and the area of society, at least in terms of commerce and business, the area of society that it's most hitting and it's most affecting, and the area that the governments are finding the most difficult to deal with, is the hospitality / sense grat industry. Just thought that was an interesting kind of observation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, looking into the future, based on this experience, any insights and suggestions on the future of ISKCON, based on what we are learning from the pandemic?
Yes, well, of course, to some degree, it depends on, how long it lasts and how effective, the scientists are, and the medical people, etc., in finding a resolution to it. And it seems to be that the only ultimate resolution will be if they find a vaccine. If they don't, then all this physical distancing, social distancing, and all of that kind of thing will have to stay in place. The way the virus spreads is from person to person. So if people come too close together, then the spread will continue, and it will increase, and it will be a big problem. So it kind of depends a little bit on the outcome. If it all ended tomorrow, then I could conceivably see the whole world, including the ISKCON world, going back to quote unquote normal. But of course, it isn't going to end tomorrow. And very likely it's not going to end for a considerable period of time. And I think the longer it goes on, the longer it won't just change society in general, which it will, but it will also change, I think, ISKCON. And I think for me, I'm already thinking, and by the way, you can see from the color of my hair that this is going to be an interesting comment, but I'm actually one of the younger GBCs. Most GBCs are older than me, and in some cases, considerably older, a decade, and maybe even some nearly 2 decades like that. So I can't really see, if this goes on for a considerable long period of time, that we're all just suddenly going to jump back on airplanes and start traveling everywhere, in our own areas, and then to India and all of those kind of things. Somehow or another, I think, and I think it's only right that we do reflect on that, both the GBC body and then more widely ISKCON, that we reflect on that. We know that Srila Prabhupada, of course, in establishing this movement, he circumnavigated the globe, 12 times like that. He flew around the world. And of course, that was 50 years ago, etc. It was also, in one sense, it had to be done because he was the only person that could really get this movement established, and he needed to travel to do that, etc. So that's all fine, 100%. But 50 odd years later, given the technology we have, here we are talking, you're in Mayapur, I'm in Dublin, and people listening from different parts of the world, you could definitely argue, and then even before the pandemic, the whole issue, I was somewhat uncomfortable, getting on airplanes so frequently, the whole carbon footprint thing, and, adding to global warming and all of that kind of thing. So I think definitely that there needs to be reflection on that. Is all the travel that we do, is it all necessary? And as a result then of this pandemic, will we reconsider that and maybe reduce things a little bit? So that's one thing. Another thing that I would say is that one of my personal things that I've mentioned in many, you mentioned earlier that I sit on a group called the BBT GBC Relations Committee, where the GBC and the BBT work together. One of the questions I often raise in those discussions is, we really need to find a way of distributing Srila Prabhupada's books that isn't, and this figure was officially given to me, by the way, officially given to me by the BBT trustees less than a month ago. It was done on an email exchange. And my question was, what percentage of Srila Prabhupada's books, BBT books, are distributed by ISKCON? And then by definition, by ISKCON generally means on the street. And the figure came back was 95%. And my kind of point was, we're too reliant on that. It's not that we will stop doing that. It's a wonderful way of meeting people, interacting with them, connecting with them, and all of those kind of things. But we're too reliant on it. We need to find other avenues of distribution of Srila Prabhupada's books. And I think what's happening now during this pandemic is we're being forced to do that. Actually, Praghosa Prabhu, who looks after our BBT warehouse in the UK, he was telling me yesterday that he ordered in 500 sets of Srimad Bhagavatams for this pandemic. And 100 sets have already been distributed, mainly by Bhaktivedanta Manor, but 100 sets have already been distributed. And of course, we're looking to distribute the whole 500 sets and more. So I think this pandemic is really forcing the issue for us that we have to find other ways of preaching, but also specifically, as I say, in relation to distributing Srila Prabhupada's books. So there would be some thoughts on that. How to, as we know, Cantabria, and you're probably more in tune with this than I am, but I also know your good friend Gopal Bhatta Prabhu regularly mentions this, that as a society, ISKCON as a society is one of the least effective spiritual or religious organizations in terms of their online presence. So again, this pandemic is a wonderful opportunity, golden opportunity for ISKCON to become more effective in that area of outreach. Yeah, so I think different things like that, this pandemic is helping with, and I think it will have a long term. And the longer it goes on, the longer the impact will be. I think the more we will drill down on these different things and try to find resolutions to them.
You mentioned about traveling less perhaps in the future, and of course not traveling now during the pandemic. In a private comment a few days ago, you said that you even feel more busy now not traveling than maybe before, when you were constantly traveling in your different countries that you supervise. Would you like to share about that? Because I found that it was a compelling comment.
And just before I go to that, I have to mention, of course, my dear friend, wonderful, wonderful devotee that many people will know, His Holiness Bhakti Marg Maharaj Ki Jai, wonderful, wonderful devotee. He, of course, has been leading the way on travel for a long time. He's walked across Canada. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think he's walked across Canada. Is it 3 times? Canada is one of the biggest countries. I think the biggest country in the world is Russia, and I think is Canada the second biggest country in the world. Anyway, it's one of the biggest countries in the world, and he's walked across it, I think, 3 times. So, do we need to get on airplanes? Maybe I should start walking to my various different temples. Keep me fit and get rid of a few excess pounds. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that. But going to your question about being busy is interesting, very interesting. Let me reveal my mind a little bit first, which is always dangerous when you're doing something online. But let me do it anyway. Is that when you travel so much, it was a great excuse when people would ring you. It was, I'm just going through security, you can't talk now. It was like that kind of thing. So people know, well, he can't use that excuse now when I ring him, So that's one thing. You're kind of, everyone knows you're locked down, you're nailed down to one location, so your excuses for avoiding phone calls or whatever it might be is greatly reduced. But no, on a serious note, in addition to that, I could say, of course, interviews like these, but of course I'm only joking. But somehow or another, you know, the amount of emails coming in, the amount of phone calls, the amount of Skype calls, conference calls, and of course, you know, Zoom has become, and now you've introduced a new one to me today or the other day. I said, will we be doing this via Zoom? And you said, no, we'll be doing it through StreamYard, which somehow or other entered my head as FarmYard. I said it to my earlier, are we doing this on FarmYard? So now StreamYard, you know, so there are so many of these platforms. And I'm just finding that I'm involved in so many of these calls that your day literally is filled with them. The other thing I should mention, it's not directly related to your question, but it's kind of connected, is that because we're locked down and different countries have different rules, but the rule in Ireland is you can go out once a day for exercise, So somehow or another, you feel that, wow, this is my sense gratification. Also, this is when I can feel liberated. I can go outside of my home or my temple or whatever it may be. I feel liberated. That I have not missed one single day taking that exercise. So actually, just from that point of view, it improved my health. But yeah, it's basically just the communication streams. They seem to have increased the amount of options of communication, and also within those options, the amount of communication I find myself doing on those various platforms has also increased. So yeah, because when this thing first started, the first thing that entered my mind was, wow, I'm going to be bored. I'm going to have nothing to do. But that just hasn't proven to be the case.
Thank you. We have a few questions already, a couple of questions from our viewers. Would you like to take them?
Only the easy ones.
Well, we have two, and they're both pretty tough.
Oh, okay. Thanks for warning me. Yeah, go ahead.
We can close here. So maybe you can say you don't have time anymore.
No problem. Let's go.
The first one is all the way from Myanmar, Burma, from Shivas Pandit Prabhu, the zonal supervisor there.
Haribo Shivas Prabhu.
Is there any support program from well-to-do temples like UK to temples which are going through difficulties?
And Srivas Prabhu's question essentially is from wealthy yatras to help less wealthy yatras.
That's how I understand. Yes.
Yeah. It's interesting, Srivas Prabhu, because I was actually going to mention when in one of the previous questions that Kaunteya Prabhu had asked me, I was going to mention the point about, you know, what can we do in these situations to kind of help ourselves, help others. And one thing would be, if we had the resources, we should seek to try and help others. And if we don't have any resources, one thing that I'm personally doing myself, I have a very small back garden, but I'm going to, for the first time in about 30 years since I became GBC, or no, 22, 23 years since I became GBC, I'm actually going to grow my own vegetables this year. I used to do that before I became a GBC. So that's something that's very easy for everybody to do, no matter how kind of poor they are, really, because obviously vegetable seeds that don't cost very much. There's one devotee in Copenhagen, Denmark, Copenhagen. His name is Lalitanath Prabhu, and he has a tiny little plot of land, and he grows an enormous amount of vegetables on that tiny plot. He supplies his own family the whole year round, and he supplies the temple, the Copenhagen temple, for most of the year in all their vegetables. And anytime I go there, you know, all the prashadam, all the sabjis are vegetables from his plot and where he grows, and they're absolutely delicious because obviously they're organic and he doesn't use any chemicals, etc. So just as a general point, you know, I think our temples now, and you can grow vegetables on your windowsill, even if you're living in cities and apartments, you know, just get the boxes and you can grow loads of vegetables on your windowsills. So that would just be a general thing for everybody. Everybody can do that, and as I say, it's phenomenal the amount of produce you can get from a small space. But to your broader question, Guru Prasad Maharaj, actually, who's GBC for countries that are relatively poor in the world, he's GBC for some of the Latin South American countries. He's actually raised this issue on quite a few occasions. You know, the idea of twinning different temples or yatras, twinning with other yatras, and specifically wealthier temples with poorer temples. So I think it will be a good thing for us to do. I should mention that in the UK, we do set aside a certain amount of Lakshmi each year. It's not a huge amount, but it's a certain amount that we invite different devotees or whatever to just put in a request for some of those funds, and then once a year we distribute them. As I say, it's not a huge amount of money. But I could seek and talk with devotees, seek to see if we can increase that. One of the interesting things, though, is when we talk about what he said, wealthy countries like the UK, and in general, I guess it's seen as a wealthy country. And then within the UK, in terms of ISKCON, you would have temples who maybe I should not name, who would be seen as being relatively wealthy. But when you dive deeper and look into the commitments they've made and things they've taken on, etc., it's just like take Mayapur as an example. Mayapur, one of our wealthiest temples in the world, if not the wealthiest temple in the world. I don't know, Canterbury, if you have any statistics on it, but certainly it's one of our wealthiest temples. They were one of the first out of the blocks. I got an email or I got something on some forum, so many forums, but I got something on some forum with Mayapur requesting temples around the world to help them because their donations have taken a nosedive because people can't come and visit. And as I say, it's kind of relative. If you've got commitments, up here, and then you enter lockdown and your income drops down to here, then you're going to have this shortfall between the two. So even though externally they may be wealthy, you have to also look into the relative details. And then the other thing is, if you take a country like the UK, you will find some centers in the UK who are really struggling. They're not wealthy and they're really struggling. And they would seek, if help is going to be offered, they would seek, for the wealthier temples in their own area to maybe look to them first and help them before they would go further afield. But they're just to give some nuances to this. But the principle that you raise, I think it is a very good idea. And we know that governments do it. I think the UK government, I think they give 0.07% of their gross domestic product or national product every year to third world countries. And that, of course, is quite a lot of money because, it's a small percentage, but a small percentage of a huge amount of money. So they do that. And maybe we should do that in ISKCON. And again, Count Ebru, you mentioned at the beginning that we both serve on a committee called the Organizational Development Committee. Maybe that's something that we should take up. Maybe me and you should present a proposal to the Organizational Development Committee that we could implement something similar into our movement, that, a small percentage of the wealthier temples, set aside that amount each year and it's put into a fund, and then less well-off temples or less well-off yatras can apply to that fund to get some help. Srila Prabhupada did it in the early days, particularly with the BBT money. The idea was, of course, in those days, India was a poor yatra. It's not the case anymore. They'd definitely be part of this. If we do a proposal, they'd definitely be part of the wealthy group of temples that we should contribute. But in the early days, Prabhupada did that, and he took money particularly from BBT to help establish the Indian yatra. So the principle is there where Prabhupada did that. So I certainly would be open to it and willing to support such an initiative, provided we could work out all the details and, it wouldn't be seen as too onerous on any given temple. But I think the principle is a very good one. Thank you, Srivas Prabhu.
Thank you, Praghosa Prabhu. We have a question from Krishna Priya Devidasi. Actually, she has 2-3 questions. They're all connected. So let's start by sharing the first part. It's a questions of policy and where the GBC stands on certain issues. Of course, the GBC might not have an official position, but of course, you're a GBC. At least you can say you can share your insights. Okay, let me show. Yeah, Krishna Priya Devidasi says, what's your advice to devotees with regard to downloading tracing apps and vaccines? Should this become compulsory in Krishna conscious perspective?
Well, first off, I would say nothing should become in this area. I think it should be compulsory that we chant Hare Krishna. But in these types of areas, I don't. My initial reaction is nothing should be compulsory. I think we would have to be very careful about that type of thing. Again, I go back to the point that I'm 58 years of age, nearly 59 actually years of age, and I have heard conspiracy theories kind of all of my life, really. But my direct experience, and I can only go from my direct experience, is that governments in the countries that I've lived in, which is basically England and Ireland, the two countries I've lived in, countries that I've lived in, I've never had any negative experience when it comes to governments having information on me and anything like that. In fact, quite the opposite. I've only ever had positive experiences, and they help you with social welfare systems, and they help you with health systems and so many different things. So personally, if in terms of these apps, and I think the idea is then, they can track you, and I think they've done it in South Korea and places like that to help with this virus and the spread of it. I personally wouldn't have a major problem with it. I wouldn't have. Now, of course, I could be wrong. 10 years down the road, they could do all sorts of weird things. Who knows? But it's never been my experience. So in general, no. The vaccine question is for me it's slightly more nuanced, because one thing that comes to mind is that they're really trying to rush this for obvious reasons. But when you rush things, we all know when we rush things in our lives that the result isn't always as good as we would have hoped it to be. So I'm a little concerned about that if they bring out a vaccine, in a month's time or 5 months' time or whatever it is, that it may be a little rushed and there may be an element of risk with it. I have 2 children. They're no longer children. They're both in their 30s now. But obviously when they were babies, and the whole thing about vaccines come in for different things. And there was one of the things that myself and my wife didn't give them, because was it the one for the whooping cough, I think, because there was some evidence that there was some risk with it in relation to something or other, and we just were a little apprehensive, like that. And so I think there was just one aspect of one vaccine that we opted out of. So yeah, certainly I wouldn't say compulsory, absolutely not compulsory. But of course, we also know that the world was afflicted with polio, whenever that was 100 years ago, measles, all these different things, that they came up with vaccines, and they effectively eradicated tuberculosis. They have effectively eradicated those diseases. So now I know there's other issues with them. What do they put into these vaccines? What are the sources of them and all of those kind of things like that. But I've never read anything from Srila Prabhupada where he was like, totally adamant that these things are demoniac or something like that. He came from a medical background himself, actually. So while I wouldn't make it compulsory, I guess I would lean on the side of weighing up the pros and cons. And as it relates to both of the things that you mentioned, Krishna Priya, I would be inclined to think that on balance, there are more pros to them than cons. I think that's the way I would sort of answer that question.
Thank you. Yeah, her follow-up was this. My concern really are forced vaccines, forced apps, and forced 5G, but I think these things are not seen as problems by the GBC. Is this correct? And let me also add her last comment that she also said that what she understood is that this virus is most dangerous for the elderly, people with other illnesses, people with weak immunity. So would you agree that one important part of the solution would be investing in being physically healthy, avoiding obesity, boosting our immune system through clean air, clear water, clear food. So would you agree that it's important, a very important aspect of the solution is to work on our health and avoiding other type of diseases?
100%, 100%. The first part, her concern is about forced vaccines, forced apps, and forced 5G. But I don't think that the GBC sees these as problems. I mean, it's kind of not really for the GBC in the sense that, you know, if you live in a country, I mean, there's, again, I'm living in Europe, UK, Ireland, you know, there's no question that the UK government or the Irish government are going to come out and say, you have to take a vaccine, you have to download this app, and you have to accept 5G in your home or whatever. Just not going to happen. Just not going to happen. You know, it's inconceivable that they would do that. So in one sense, that's not really a GBC thing, because, you know, if you're living in a country, I won't name any, but if you're living in a country where they say you have to do those things, you're going to have no choice. Whether the GBC agrees or doesn't agree, you're not going to have a choice anyway. So it's kind of not really GBC business. But the other point you make about people who are more susceptible to this illness, and not more susceptible to getting it, but if you get it, more susceptible to serious complications with it, 100%, you know. And Prabhupada signed off on all of his letters, you know, I hope this meets you in good health. Prabhupada took a brisk morning walk every single morning. Oftentimes devotees, you know, who went on those walks would say it was difficult keeping up with Prabhupada. Prabhupada was 70 or 70 something, and they're in their 20s and 30s, but Prabhupada walking was very, very brisk. So absolutely, you know, our bodies are temples of Krishna, and we should look after them. And it's true, you know, they say diabetes, they say in the UK, they say of all the people who have died from this illness, 25% of them have had diabetes, you know, and diabetes generally comes, type 2 diabetes generally comes from poor lifestyle. So in terms of that, I would say 100%. And something I should mention, something I've noticed now during this lockdown, when going out for exercise, going out for japa walks like that, particularly if you go early in the morning, it's incredible. Because, I mean, early in the morning, particularly in Western countries, very different in India. It's amazing in India, you know, you go out at 5 o'clock in the morning for a japa walk and there's millions of people. It's just like the middle of the day. But in the West, it's very, very different. You know, you go out at 5 o'clock in the morning in the West and generally it's very, very quiet. But it's even more quiet now because you don't hear the humming of any cars. You don't hear the humming of any trains because all these things aren't running anymore. At least they're greatly reduced and at that time in the morning when they're running. And you don't hear, you know, aircraft flying overhead or anything like that. So it's even, all you hear is what we refer to as the dawn chorus or all the birds like that. And it's absolutely mode of goodness in bucket loads, and much more so than it was prior to this pandemic. So, but that's a slightly different point in the question that Krishna Priya is raising. But yes, 100% to the second part of her question.
And thank you. She thanks you for the answer. So we are already running more than 1 hour. You were very generous with your time. Our viewers can testify that actually Praghosa Prabhu is a very dynamic, energetic, engaging speaker. So in closure, I would like to do a little publicity to another event exactly 48 hours from now, 47 hours from now, on the 25th of May. Praghosa Prabhu will actually facilitate an important live event. I have the title here, the Swan Model of Care in End of Life and Bereavement. And this would be a panel of expert professionals. We have Praghosa Prabhu, who will be the master of ceremony, the interviewer. We'll have Kripamoya Prabhu, a disciple of Srila Prabhupada with many decades of experience of pastoral care. We'll have, I see her civil name, Sunitra Su Singh. You mentioned her name before.
Yeah, Sukhanti Radha.
Sukhanti Radha, sorry for that. She's a professional nurse. She brings her experience to the table. We have Nila Madhava Prabhu, who is the ISKCON UK funeral director. And then we have another professional in the end of life care, Fiona Murphy, who is an MBE and works in that field. In closure, you like to say a couple of words, inviting our viewer to attend this event in a couple of days?
Yeah, and that is a very august panel, actually. You know, all wonderful people, wonderful devotees, with specific, as you've outlined, with specific expertise in this particular area. MBE, it stands for, member, isn't it? Member of the British Empire, I think. Member of the British Empire. Anyway, it's an award that you get from the Queen of England for outstanding service in any particular field. So Fiona Murphy. Who, by the way, my legal name is also Murphy. You know, we're both Murphys. So Fiona, although she's British, I'm sure she has Irish heritage. Anyway, she's renowned in this field, both in terms of active service in it, but also in terms of her knowledge of it and you know, creating policies and papers and all that kind of thing related to it. Sukanti Radha, your god sister, is a nurse and has been a professional nurse for many years, and she has been working actively in hospitals right now. She may even be working in a hospital right now today. I'm not sure, but she's been actively working with coronavirus and COVID-19 patients like that. So she has some you know, real hands-on experience. And then, as you said, the other two devotees, Kripa Moivaru, a dear friend of mine, who he's put together some publications on this whole area of end-of-life care from a spiritual perspective, Krishna conscious perspective. And Nilamadeva Prabhu, who is a very senior devotee at Bhaktivedanta Manor and has many years in the whole area of funerals and looking after devotees in their last days. And what I would say about it, Count Prabhu, just if I have 30 seconds to finish, what I'll say about it is that for devotees, we obviously focus and try to focus as much as possible on the spiritual side and the transitioning, leaving this world, the soul leaving the body, and that the important part is focusing on that spiritual side and where we're going, and obviously service to Krishna, service to Prabhupada, etc. Will protect us and help us and all of that kind of thing in relation to that. But nonetheless, we still have to leave these bodies. And we have experience, anyone who has experience of that also with devotees, is that, you know, this isn't like sitting down taking prasadam. You know, it's a little bit different. You know, the dynamic and the situation, and it's a little different. Now, of course, if we're all pure devotees, then maybe it would be like sitting down taking prasadam. But we're not all pure devotees, and there are many challenges that we will all face when going through the transitioning from out of this body. So I think it's a very important subject, and I think we're all getting older, and I think it would be good for us to prepare, both obviously spiritually as best as we possibly can, but part of that being able to know how best to position ourselves during that transitioning, who should be there, etc., and all of those kind of things. And how to manage it as best as we possibly can. And of course, there may be a lot of pain involved. So therefore, how to deal with that without losing our consciousness in terms of being able to focus on the spiritual side. So yeah, very important subject. And as I say, 4 wonderful panelists who will be able to give much information on it.
Thank you so much, Praghosa Prabhu, for giving your time, answering our questions. It's always inspiring for devotees to hear directly from one of the top leaders in our movement, the members of the governing body commission of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, founder Acharya, His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. You have been very generous with your time and energy.
The pleasure was all mine, Dante Prabhu. I thank you for this initiative, by the way, because I've been following some of the interviews. I thank you for this initiative, great initiative, I think. And I also thank you for the wonderful darshan of Lord Jagannath behind you. And I apologize for my super messy bookcase behind me.
But those are all treasures of spiritual knowledge. I can see that.
There's Prabhupada walking in front of a London bus.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Thanks,
thank you
Kante.
very much, and thank you very much to all the viewers. Some of them have thank you directly, like Chitra Rupini, Devi. Thank you very much for your presence and your answers. And to all our viewers, thank you. Stay tuned for more live events at the GBC.
By the way, the wonderful Chicharupini, the mother of the Italian Yatra, glorious, glorious devotee, just to say. Thank you.
So thank you all. Stay tuned for more live events at the GBC strategic planning team. And don't miss Praghosa Prabhu's event in a couple of days from now. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Jai, Haribol.